I'm Jim Fischer with Fischer Compliance. Today I'm going to present the CWEA mid-year collection system meeting, and we're going to have a short presentation starting with audits and enforcement, kind of a review of some of the information about compliance and enforcement going on with the program. Some do-it-yourself recommendations for improving effectiveness, and also some do-it-yourself recommendations for added resiliency. Compliance and evaluation best practice suggestions, and ending with a few suggestions for the new SSS WDRs that are currently under review. Thanks to the West Bay Sanitary District, the City of Roseville, and the last but not least, the City of Pacifica, with Ray Mendez here, for some of the photos here in the presentation. So starting with audits and enforcement, I'd just like to point out a couple of things. Water quality enforcement policy is always something that we recommend on a regular basis to review. I'm going to jump into some of the specifics on this policy, but basically the policy to the right, on the right red areas, are things to stay away from for formal enforcement. Of course, no one wants enforcement, but you definitely want to be on the left, and we've shown this before. Verbal warning or informal enforcement is the way to go. To really, the enforcement policy discusses this in detail about giving a chance to the regular community to understand and resolve the violations before they become formal. So that's just all this is here to show. I'm going to jump into something that's often overlooked, the economic benefit of noncompliance. This is in the policy, step 7 in the policy, and it's a benefit of any savings or monetary gain from the act of an omission that constitutes a violation. So it's pretty broad. That can be things like lack of training, failure to fix the pump station before it failed, to fix category grade 5s if you're doing PACP or your other ratings that you know about ahead of time, failing to have those planned. These are all things that the water boards will definitely evaluate in any kind of enforcement action for an economic benefit. I'll show a little bit more of that in a few minutes. This is just a few slides to give you an update to some of the more sophisticated data visualizations the water boards has developed. You might not be aware of, starting with ones just to kind of show the overall SSO statewide, the overall trends of the metrics for the benchmarks for SSO per 100 miles per pipe for different category sizes of systems here. You can see on the top. That's something to point out that's new. SSOs with hyperlinks. This is a pretty awesome tool they're developing. I was just recently found out about browsing some of the Tableau websites with basically you can hover over an SSO here in the data visualization tool, and it will bring up the actual report. You know, who certified it, who it was, how much went where, etc. for that basic CWEA report. So for every single spill, there's a hyperlink to visualize the data charts. Again, this is their way of more tools of more exploring how they look at systems, how they can drill down, maybe select systems for investigating or getting more information, or maybe even auditing. So something to be aware of. Reporting compliance, this just shows the overall trends. This is something new in Tableau. A few more here to show. Again, trends here both for the reporting compliance by year, kind of in a different way here from the previous slide. A visualization tool here, another one developed for GIS spatially where people are in the Bay Area. Again, as a way to, I think the water board's goal, I understand before I left, is to have the GIS coordinates for everybody in the state to see where everybody is located. So this is one developed. I hadn't seen this before, other than a few days ago, for the Region 2 San Francisco Bay. Some other interesting ones just to touch on. Who gets selected for inspections? This shows the Type B. These are the more in-depth compliance inspections. And the trends, you can see they went way down here for 2020 with the pandemic. But again, for all the regions here, you could easily use this tool to drill down on the region you're in. Again, to keep aware of where they're going, who they're inspecting. This is one for actually the enforcement, showing category of spill and how many grand totals have been enforced upon for the spills in CWEA. So very interesting visualization here. Another one for Southern California, same kind of deal, the enforcement report. And one for the San Francisco Bay Area, showing where the enforcement levels have happened in the Bay Area. Moving on to a few other tips here, things to remember. The enforcement pages in each one of the regional boards. I have LA, Santa Ana, and the San Diego board, just to show, basically, and remind everybody that that's something that you want to have bookmarked and to be looking at regularly. I look at all of them regularly to see if there's been anything new. I'm just going to highlight a few in the San Diego region and maybe drill down a little bit on the economic benefit. This is one for Laguna Beach fairly recently. The important points here are in the attachment A, you'll see as part of the administrative civil liability package. And this is very interesting of the actual documents relied upon for the evidence package. And you can see here the questionnaire, their 45-day report, monitoring reports, etc., their data and so forth. So that's really important to point out. I'll show another one in a minute where they actually show Exhibit 1 SSMP. So they're using that data for the evidence in developing the actual enforcement. This is another one I presented at SARBS here on the economic benefit. For this one, significant, $257,000 for basically what happened here is the city had a failure of a force main that was basically out of service. And the board basically, believed that they enjoyed an economic benefit from avoiding bypassing this area, this force main under non-emergency conditions. So that was a long time and a lot of money. So again, this air relief valve failed. The board took an action. It was significant, and they still believe that there was an economic benefit that was adopted into the order and settled. So I really like this part. The city of Laguna Beach should really feel good about this. And I don't see this in every one of the orders. The due diligence measures were actually highlighted here and called out. So this is a really good practice to be reminded of. Should you have an action, really, do all you can to highlight everything you're doing to prevent this from happening again. They put some big control measures in here on this force main system and funded it. And they already had things in place beforehand too. So again, all this comes out in the enforcement. I was very pleased to see it listed here in the enforcement action, the actual formal enforcement action. Another slide from the SARBS I presented a few days ago. The San Diego had a big fine for a spill. Again, the punchline here is to look at what did they rely on for their evidence and what they looked at. The city of San Diego, SSMP, #1 right here. So, and this isn't complete either. These are the big ticket items, but I know the board does a ton of research on what other people are doing to protect their pipes. That was also factored into this case. But also, other BEN calculations, that's the benefit of non-compliance. We just kind of went over that for Laguna Beach. Staff costs, those are all factored in. But again, really to highlight the SSMP, that was the first thing they picked up to see what the city is doing or not doing, the gap analysis. So that's one you definitely want to be aware of and something to be aware of when you're doing your update to your SSMP. Think about the spills that have already happened. If you're going to have enforcement, how does the SSMP and what you're doing, is it showing everything, all the great things you're doing, and how that could play into the enforcement action if there's one taken for a past spill. So moving on to some do-it-yourself tips for evaluating the effectiveness of your program. This is something that I presented also for the SARBS a few days ago. I often have seen elements 1 through 11, or the routine elements, the SSMP elements in the order reviewed. I don't see a lot of agencies going beyond the minimum 1 through 11 and looking at these other elements like the implementation, training, SOPs, your compliance for notification and reporting, large SSO monitoring program. These are all areas not to be forgotten that will certainly be checked by an inspector if there's an audit or any kind of an inspection, any kind of inquiry by the board. So highlighting these also as part of your SSMP update or your audits, definitely a best practice, a recommended best practice that I'm doing also with people I'm helping. Key performance indicators is another area of opportunity I see is especially the ones that have been prevented, like pump station failures avoided. We put on this equipment, we have good monitoring, flow, level, or just SCADA. We avoided 5 spills last year, or we avoided SSOs by proactively doing these things. These are things that can really be highlighted as key performance indicators. Again, really good things to keep your hand on the pulse. Some agencies like the Sal Placer MUD up here in Northern California, they even do KPIs for every SSMP element to make sure they're really tracking all 1 through 11 and maybe even more elements like the ones I showed earlier to really keep their hand on the pulse of their program. So those are, again, really ones to really emphasize. The ones prevented, I think, are the ones, at least the agencies I'm talking with and helping, they may not be tracking this as close as they should on the ones prevented. So definitely something, as a DIY tip for your own program. In addition to the other hard work you're doing for cleaning, getting on those hot spots, foaming, there's other ones. But again, highlighting those production costs, being aware of those, having those ready for an inspector or having them in your SSMP, better yet, or your audit, really should be highlighted. So you should be getting credit for these. That's the bottom line for doing them and tracking them. So we're going to move on to some do-it-yourself tips for added resiliency for the sewer program. Of course, everyone knows the informal draft order is out. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that because there's nothing official yet in terms of a draft order for comments. So this is basically what it says, that they have a lot of information about risk assessments and remediation. I took a hard look at this and thought about what would be some of the top things system operators, managers, crews can do for adding resiliency to their SSMP. And so I came up with a pretty long list of things here I'm going to present. I presented this at the SARBs also. I'm just going to kind of skim through these, but these are ones that you might think of for your program to help, again, with added resiliency. What's your most likely location or locations for your next SSO? Inspectors always ask this, both for the gravity system, for the force main. What keeps you awake at night? Where do you anticipate having problems? And are you adequately operating and maintaining all parts of the system? This is part of D8. So, data on how are you being impacted by climate. The board has said, regardless of what they come out with, that they're absolutely going to have something about addressing ongoing climate impacts. So this is definitely one to be thinking about now. Even if you don't have something formal in your plan, have something, maybe a new write-up for things that you've evaluated or just benchmarked for your own system, so that you can have that available when you update your SSMP or your audit. Predictive monitoring. Are you doing temperature readings at pump stations or taking oil samples? Again, being as predictive as you can to prevent a failure before it happens, to avoid a failure. Ongoing programs, are they described? Are they written up in your SSMP or separate from your SSMP, where those can be updated on a regular basis that doesn't require you to update your SSMP? Capital budgets and spending, alarms. So this goes on. I won't read every one. Mutual assistance agreements. This is huge for Southern California, especially when they have beach closures and agencies are down on resources. I know those boards down there. I know them pretty well, working with them all these years. They are big on the mutual aids. They'll ask about it. Peer review from outside agencies or a third party. There's definitely advantages to having somebody else look at your program, your audits, change logs. So this, I won't read all these. If you want to go back and look at them, that's fine. I don't want to waste a lot of time here, but there's other ones in here ending with number 28 that I thought of for this presentation that you might want to think about for beefing up your own program. Moving on to some compliance evaluation best practices. These are some of the practices I'm recommending for people that I'm talking with now. Complete sewer program review, not just the SSMP. Again, I'll show that in a minute again to review that, but there's other things other than the SSMP, like the MRP compliance. For example, your large SSO monitoring compliance plan. Beyond that, so that's something to remember. I'm recommending inspections actually to the US EPA like they do, and that can be also, I can help you if you want to develop that for your own program, looking at EPA standards and doing that ahead of time, again, to have that added resilience for any kind of inspection by a regulator or even an NGO. And focusing on the effectiveness, I'm finding a lot of the plans I see don't really focus too much on effectiveness, more on compliance. So definitely something that could be improved. Here's that chart again showing these additional things beyond just the 11 SSMP core elements to not be forgotten about. And this is a view here of sort of the process of that compliance evaluation process. That's in the EPA standards that I'm using. Desktop review, doing a pre-inspection conference with the enrollee, including review of the pre-inspection questionnaire answers, actually doing the inspection, post-inspection review, and using all this to really drive the final audit report to make it very objective. Here's an example of one from an agency that I'm helping. Basically here is how it looks like in the report, and the interviews, again, to corroborate what's the management saying with what the staff are saying, in harmonizing that and coming up with any differences to point out, any opportunities for improvement, et cetera, et cetera. So again, these are all based on the US EPA's guidance, and that's available here for free online. Here's another view of some of the examples. What I'm recommending here, not just looking at the provision D13I, the goals by itself, but the other provisions in here that are related to that goal, because this is something that inspectors, the boards, will consider in any kind of an action. They'll look at everything in the order, not just that one element for the goal. So that's something to keep aware of. You know, think of it more in general terms of how the entire order applies to your system. And then also, this is an example of some of the data relying upon for an evaluation: the SSMP, the pre-inspection questionnaire answers, the compliance evaluation inspection, and the flat files. So all that goes into the audit. Okay, I came up with a couple of things to leave with here at the end for suggestions for improving the WDRs. And this would be the informal draft that's currently out right now. I took a look at it. I think there's a couple, maybe 4 or 5 things I would like to suggest here, and part of this is being developed, presented here for discussion and among the members here at the mid-year conference. Updating the 2010 Compliance and Enforcement Plan. That plan was written way back, 11 years ago for basically implementing the order. Now here we are, 14 years later, 15 years later, plus with implementation. Doing an official update with input from both, the regulators here at the water boards, Office of Enforcement, and the regional boards. So getting everybody's input, having a new plan, I think would be great for added compliance and enforcement transparency on what the expectations are, kind of historically what the board's done, where they plan to go would be something really worthwhile. So it's here on the library right now. If you haven't seen it, just go to the SSO, on the SSO webpage, not the library. That's here. On the regular webpage here, and then highlighted here, Compliance and Enforcement Plan, January 2010. And number 2 would be some sort of a fix-it ticket or a resolution program for the small SSOs. We all know those smaller SSOs continue to accrue. There's tens of thousands of violations of these, and this could help the water boards resolve these because they're just annually accumulating at a high rate. So I came up with a little maybe a little excerpt here on this section 6 that's in the current staff informal draft, to maybe consider a few things here to take formal enforcement actions for the small category 1 SSOs less than 50,000, with maybe even considering an escalating structure in here for looking back at 12 months to really, again, it's a basic monetary penalty. It would be formal enforcement. It would resolve these violations, take them off the books for the agency, take them off the books for the water boards, and so this would be an idea for a structure. Of course, this is just something that I came up with. These could be changed. There's no real basis for these numbers other than to come up with something to present here as a way to sort of showcase this concept to the water boards and to the people at the mid-year conference here. Number 3, streamline enforcement for large SSOs. Same kind of thing, having some sort of maybe a voluntary program where people could more appropriately approach the board to say, we've had these 5 large SSOs, can we resolve these, and have this be more of a streamlined process where it would again help the water boards resolve these significant numbers of annual violations, and there are many that occur in this category. Number 4, a formal implementation committee. I think that would be a great thing to have, and maybe even written into the order so that it's more formal. With the past order, there was a data review committee. It was more informal, people getting together. I'd like to see, my suggestion is to have more of a formal committee that would really be a partnership between the industry and the regulated community, the industry, and the water boards to really ensure that the performance of these WDRs are going to be really improving and efficient over time. Number 5, the last one, would be a biannual performance review of the WDRs. That was done, if you look back at the website, the SSO reduction website, that was done every couple years. I think having something more formally established in front of the State Water Board to really give benchmarks to see how the order is doing, tracking its effectiveness, having more transparency with compliance and enforcement for everybody, for both for the water boards and for the regulated community, would be great. For more, again, transparency, to really provide more details how the program is going over time. So that's it for this video. I just wanted to point out I have a YouTube channel, Fischer Compliance, with a bunch of training materials. If you're interested, those are available right now, the YouTube channel. And if you haven't yet, sign up on my website for updates to some of these trainings that are going on here at fishercompliance.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.